increasingly hot summers and climate when they're during policy deliberations about energy. Today, I'm going to talk about two different visions for the future of the natural gas system. I'm going to refer to natural gas as methane because it is predominantly methane, and I think it's a little more accurate than natural, which suggests that it's healthy. So I'm going to talk about two different futures of the natural gas system. One is where we blend hydrogen, and the other is where we transition from gas to water as part of what we're going to call the geogrid. So there are two different visions, and I'm going to take a break in between so we can have questions after the hydrogen. So Becca, do you want to go ahead and pull up the slides? So right now, natural gas utilities are asking states and governments for permission to pilot hydrogen blending. So hydrogen gas and blend it with natural gas or methane. And they claim that this methane hydrogen blend will drive down emissions. And so I'm going to speak specifically today about blending hydrogen and moving it in pipes into people's homes and businesses for heating, for water heating, and for cooking. There are other uses of hydrogen, like fuel cells, which are absolutely exciting and fantastic, but we're going to be specifically talking about the health impacts and the climate impacts of heating with fossil hydrogen. And at the end of this talk, I want you to understand that the claim that natural gas companies make that blending hydrogen and methane will reduce emissions is absolutely incorrect, and that heating and cooking with methane and hydrogen is a really bad idea because it's bad for health and it's unsafe. So let's start at the beginning. Next slide. What is hydrogen gas and why is the energy sector so excited about it? So hydrogen gas is, as somebody said, the most abundant molecule in the universe, but there's very little hydrogen gas as hydrogen and hydrogen bonded to itself. So hydrogen is almost entirely found in chemical compounds like water or hydrocarbons. So to make hydrogen gas, energy is used to separate hydrogen from these other compounds. Do you want to advance it? I think I didn't realize I've got, oh, look, I forgot I added. Go ahead and advance it again, Becca. Forgot I added those two little things to the slide. Next slide. So when you burn hydrogen, it actually doesn't emit any carbon dioxide. So hydrogen is often called a non-emitting fuel because it doesn't emit any carbon dioxide. But when it is burned, you get byproducts of water and nitrogen oxides. So while hydrogen doesn't produce any carbon dioxide, that really isn't the whole story. The way in which hydrogen is produced is really where the emissions come from. And so it can be produced in a clean way and it can be produced in a dirty way or from fossil fuels. So there's three main pathways to make hydrogen gas, and hydrogen is named differently for each method of production. We're going to talk about gray, blue, and green today, but there's a lot of different colors. There's pink, there's yellow, there's brown, there's turquoise. We're going to stick with the three main ones, gray, blue, and green. So gray hydrogen is made from methane gas using a process called steam methane reformation. In the steam methane reformation, methane reacts with steam under pressure to produce hydrogen gas, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. This process obviously requires continued use of methane, which when leaked into the atmosphere has a very high global warming potential. Over a 20-year period, methane's global warming potential is 84 to 87 times more warming than carbon dioxide. Blue hydrogen is gray hydrogen coupled with carbon capture and storage. There's actually only a couple of places in North America now that currently attempt carbon capture. The US is attempting to build more, but currently there's only a couple. And those two have not proved that they can actually capture carbon at the rates needed. We need to be able to capture carbon at above 90%. And right now, the carbon capture rates are between 56% and 90%. And the thing about blue hydrogen is that it doesn't capture the leaking methane that leaks all along the pathway to get that methane to the plant. And there is uncertainty about whether the carbon can be stored in large quantities for long-term purpose. We don't have really any good data on that. So just to be clear about the naming convention, I'm not going to call hydrogen gray or blue. I'm just going to refer to it as fossil hydrogen because it's made from a fossil fuel. Green hydrogen is made with an electrolyzer through a process known as electrolysis. And it uses electricity to separate water into hydrogen gas and oxygen. And because it uses 100% renewable electricity to do this, this is truly a zero carbon emissions fuel. Next slide. So here's the problem. 99% of hydrogen produced in the US is made from fossil fuels. And while we are very excited that more green hydrogen is in the pipeline, it just isn't available yet. And when it does become available, it will be incredibly precious. It's the energy equivalent of caviar or gold. And so we need to make sure that we use it in a very specific way. Next slide. So before I started learning about hydrogen, did not know that we produce so much hydrogen in the US already. We produce about 10 million metric tons of hydrogen every year in the US, and it's a key ingredient in fertilizer, which makes ammonia, which is the nitrogen with 3 hydrogens on it. So it's ammonia, and it's made from hydrogen gas. It's also used in oil refining and as a chemical feedstock for other important things like methanol, which is then in turn used in a ton of different products like plywood subfloors and solvents and windshield washer fluids. Next slide. So the carbon impact of the hydrogen that we make worldwide is 830 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. This is the same amount of emissions as 2 Californias. And California is the 6th largest economy in the world. So this is a lot of carbon that hydrogen is already impacting our climate with. Next slide. So there's, just to put it into context as to why gas utilities want to use hydrogen, there's mounting pressure on gas utilities to reduce carbon dioxide and fugitive methane emissions to meet both international and national climate targets. As you may recall, the US rejoined the Paris Agreement, and as part of that committed to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And the latest IPCC report stated that we have to reduce fossil fuel use quickly, and they named methane as a really important gas to focus on. And in some states like California and Massachusetts, states have emission reductions mandates that fossil fuel companies and gas utilities are having to figure out how to be in line with. Next slide. So gas utilities basically have a lot of pipes in the ground, and they deliver gas to us, and their job is to deliver it as safely as possible. So when they're asked to reduce their carbon impact, they're looking at ways to leverage their current infrastructure using the pipes that they have in the ground. And what they are what they are proposing right now, at least in Massachusetts, is to use biogas, which is methane, to use synthetic gas, which is gas made from hydrogen, and it's methane, and then to use hydrogen to reduce their emissions. So remember that hydrogen already has a huge greenhouse gas footprint. It's larger than California. Now imagine that we start to expand the use of hydrogen into blending with natural gas. But we have never used it in this way before. So the demand for hydrogen will go up, and subsequently the demand for methane gas to make that hydrogen will also go up. So I'm going to talk to you about the impacts of using fossil hydrogen in our natural gas system. Basically, it's going to increase greenhouse gases. It's going to lock in the methane gas system. It will waste renewable energy, and it will increase costs for consumers. There are safety concerns about putting a highly explosive gas into people's homes and into people's businesses. And it will perpetuate health inequities from air pollution that comes from the methane gas system. Next slide. Blending fossil hydrogen with methane will increase greenhouse gases. This graph is from peer-reviewed paper published by Dr. Haworth. And you can see here that yellow is carbon dioxide, orange is methane emissions. And when you count the carbon and methane impact, hydrogen made from natural gas with or without carbon capture is actually worse than methane. So emissions from producing fossil hydrogen gas, gray or blue, can exceed the greenhouse gas emissions of methane alone. So it's not, if we're using blue hydrogen, we are not going to be reducing greenhouse gases. Furthermore, oh, sorry, it's fine. Furthermore, when you use hydrogen in pipelines, it embrittles them, it makes them hard, and that makes them more likely to crack. And so we're going to get more and larger cracks, which means more leaks of methane in our system. So we already know that our gas system is leaking all over the system, and that it's leaking worse than what's reported to the EPA. So we don't really want to put hydrogen in these pipes where it can cause additional leaks. Next slide. So on the left-hand side is a full-page ad from National Grid that ran in the Boston Globe yesterday. They claim to offer a fossil-free energy future, touting green hydrogen, this biogas, which is methane, and synthetic gas, which is methane. The problem is that there's actually no green hydrogen available. So they say that they're going to use green hydrogen, but they likely will not be able to source any green hydrogen. So it's going to be blue hydrogen in the best case scenario, and gray hydrogen in the worst case scenario. We are going to increase that demand for fossil hydrogen, and that in turn will increase the demand for the methane needed to make that fossil hydrogen. So you need about 1.3 times more methane to make hydrogen to deliver to the same amount of heat. We're also going to maintain our current system, which is 80% methane in the pipes. And the public will be assured that methane is fossil-free energy, or they'll be assured that it's decarbonized because hydrogen doesn't emit carbon when burned. But these are really just sleight of hands, doublespeak for hiding the reality behind what is happening when you mix methane with fossil hydrogen. Next slide. So green hydrogen is pretty great. Why isn't it an option for blending with methane for heating and cooking? And we're specifically talking about blending it for heating and cooking. There are other great uses for green hydrogen. Remember, I said it's like caviar, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Next slide. So like I said, there's no green hydrogen available. Less than 1% of all hydrogen is green right now. The US government is trying to ramp up the availability of green hydrogen and bring down its price to $1 per kilogram by 2030. But even those projects that are planned won't have enough green hydrogen to use for heating until 2040 or beyond. So if we use renewables to make green hydrogen, there can be a trade-off. Those renewables don't get used to green the grid. So we need to build a lot more solar and wind to get to zero carbon economy. And thirdly, even if we had enough green hydrogen, you can only blend it up to 20% safely. After about 20%, the appliances which were designed to burn methane have to be replaced or retrofitted. And because they're designed to burn, you have to have appliances designed to burn a blend of hydrogen and methane or 100% hydrogen. So you're going to have to replace all of these appliances. Next slide. So let me explain the 20% blending issue a little bit more. Hydrogen has the highest energy content by weight of any fuel, but it has a comparatively low density. So it requires greater physical volume for the same energy as other fuels. So that means when we actually replace 20% of volume of methane with 20% hydrogen, it actually has less energy content. It's only about 7% of the energy content, even though it's 20% volume. And the difference in this density also means that there's not a linear relationship between volume and greenhouse gas reductions. So it sounds like a large blend, a 20% blend, but you're actually only getting at most 6% reduction in greenhouse gases. And that's probably less when you consider the additional leaks that you're gonna get in the pipelines. Next slide. So once we get to more than 20% blended hydrogen, we either need to switch to electric appliances or we need to switch to hydrogen. And when we look at efficiency when we're thinking about hundreds and hundreds of buildings, efficiency becomes very important. So when we look at efficiency, we find that the same unit of renewable energy is used 5 to 6 times more efficiently than hydrogen. And what this means is that we build less renewables to power the same number of buildings if we're using more efficient appliances. So remember when I said green hydrogen is like caviar, and using it to blend with natural gas is sort of like throwing caviar in soup. We have better ways to use this green hydrogen and the renewables from which it's made. It's better to use these renewables for electricity for powering heat pumps. And the pace of renewable installation will be insufficient to meet both the increased demands of electrification and putting hydrogen in pipes. Next slide. So people who are engineers and know a lot more about hydrogen than I have, or I do, put together this really nice ladder. And at the top of the ladder are basically unavoidable uses of hydrogen, but we absolutely need to use it for. You can see fertilizer is at the top. And then you can see things like long haul aviation, shipping, and steel. It's at the top. At the bottom is domestic heating. So notice that so why are gas companies all over the United States pushing hydrogen if it's not really a great use of it? Well, in the end, it helps their bottom line to expand the use of hydrogen, which is really only used in industrial sectors now, because, as I said before, it increases that demand for the natural gas, which is used to make it. Next slide. So hydrogen is much more expensive than methane gas, and it always will be because gray and blue hydrogen are made from methane, right? Gray hydrogen is the least expensive, but blue hydrogen, where you have to capture the additional carbon and store it, is more expensive. And currently green hydrogen is the most expensive. So if we start blending hydrogen, it's going to increase consumer costs. And it's not just the gas itself that's more expensive. You have higher delivery costs. The energy of pumping a lighter gas is significant when you start needing to move that gas across the country. And that can make the cost of hydrogen, the cost of gas bills, 8 to 15 times higher than methane alone if you were to blend hydrogen or synthetic gas, which is made from hydrogen. Next slide. And like I said before, it blends above 20%. Consumers are also going to be on the line for replacing all their appliances because they can't burn blends above 20%. Next slide. So the thing about hydrogen is it ignites a lot more easily and it's much more explosive than methane. So we're going to blend it and we're going to pipe it into people's homes. And the gas companies are saying that they can do this safely, but there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be put in place to actually use hydrogen safely. So when you go beyond 25% hydrogen in fuel, in most places in the world, you're going to no longer be able to use the same equipment. Electronics, for example, have to be explosion proof. And there should be no sparks because hydrogen ignites with almost any air to fuel ratio. I just can't imagine a kitchen or a household with no sparks whatsoever. I mean, just think about, lighting birthday candles for children. Next slide. Go ahead and push play on this. I'm going to try to show you what a flashback is. One of the problems with hydrogen is when you blend it with methane, it increases the risk of a flashback. We'll see if you have to just. Oh.
1 second. I'm seeing if I can get it to. 1 second. Let's see if I can get it to play out of the. There we go. It'll work like this.
Okay.
Can you still see it? Here.
It's not going to work. I was worried it wouldn't work.
Basically, I don't know why.
What happens is the flame is just quickly extinguished, but the gas continues to flow. And the flashbacks can lead to appliance shutdown, damage to appliances, and they're a safety hazard because the gas leaks in enclosed areas. So because hydrogen can ignite at almost any air to gas ratio, a leak could mean a fire or an explosion. Next slide. So the other thing about 20% blend of hydrogen is that it still is 80% methane, and burning fossil fuels in residential and commercial sector right now is responsible for $205 billion in health impacts. These are in premature deaths. The authors of this are from Harvard, and they did not include hospitalizations or any additional medications that people may have to incur. Sorry, I'm getting a call and my computer is just making everything go away. Just 1 second. So anyway, so you can see that the costs of continued use of the methane gas system are substantial to health. Next slide. Hydrogen will also perpetuate existing inequities. Communities of color are disproportionately exposed to air pollution from buildings. They're actually exposed to air pollution in almost every sector except for agriculture. And what this means is that because they're exposed to high levels of pollution, they're also disproportionately get sick from air pollution and are likely to miss school days, work days, and have underlying illnesses associated with this pollution. Next slide. Hydrogen will increase nitrogen oxides and perpetuate these existing inequities. Nitrogen oxide is one of the main air pollutants from steam methane reformation. So as production of hydrogen ramps up, so will NOx. And when burned, hydrogen releases 6 times more nitrogen dioxide than methane alone. So as the blend rates increase, nitrogen oxides are expected to increase. And as you may know, nitrogen oxides are a precursor to particulate matter and ozone, which are associated with worse symptoms of asthma. So we don't know how this will, we don't know specifically how hydrogen blending will affect indoor pollution from gas stoves. Those studies are still ongoing, but we do know that with the limitations on hydrogen blending, 80% of the gas will be the methane and just perpetuate the existing inequities that we have. Next slide. Climate change, health inequities are also magnified by climate change, and making the reductions in greenhouse gases is just a necessary element of our pursuit of health equity. Next slide. So the most cost-effective, healthy, lowest emission path is to use green hydrogen for hard to electrify industrial processes and to invest in electric options like heat pumps for heating and cooling. Next slide. So these are just some policy recommendations. We want to promote and expand electrification and the direct use of renewable energy to heat buildings. We want to require environmental health impacts, comprehensive health impact assessments, and cost effectiveness analysis of new hydrogen infrastructure in comparison to clean energy before it is installed, and require accounting of the full life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of fossil hydrogen, and require the certification of green hydrogen and reserve green hydrogen for difficult to electrify industrial purposes. Next slide. So thank you for listening. This is my first time giving this presentation, and so it'd be really helpful to me to hear what you found confusing and what you found helpful, so that I can continue to improve on this presentation, and also just to answer any questions that you have. And then afterwards, I will give you a presentation about the geogrid, which is a different future that we can envision for the gas system, and one that's a little less explosive and also healthier.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to find a way to get off mute. Thank you so much for that. So I just wanted to open it up for any questions. I know a few of you just joined. Thank you so much for joining. Any questions you have about anything that Andee just presented, you can also just type it in the chat, or we can move on to the GeoGrid.
I had a question. So I was wondering, because at the end you mentioned saving green hydrogen for like chemical processes that are difficult to do without hydrogen. And I've seen that Toyota has created a hydrogen vehicle, and just heard issues about like the longevity of batteries, especially lithium batteries, in terms of being able to meet the demand of having every car on the road be an electric vehicle. So I was just kind of curious, like what sort of future do you envision for for vehicles and transport, and what sort of energy sources could be used for that?
Yeah, green hydrogen actually is a great use for long haul trucks, for aviation, for shipping. We're going to have to use it for that. Like you said, there is some debate about whether there's going to be enough lithium ions, but as far as efficiency goes, lithium ions are more efficient than green hydrogen, as in cars as well. So you want to use the hydrogen to sort of to move those bigger vehicles like long haul trucks and ships and airplanes.
I had sort of a like an unrelated question, but at the beginning you were talking about kind of leakage through the current pipes. Mm-hmm. And how like long-term with hydrogen, those pipes are going to become more brittle, more leaks, etc. And I was kind of wondering like what, like how frequently, if you know, they change out those like the piping now, and whether there's any like discussion amongst these companies that are sort of pushing for more of the hydrogen use, if there's any like understanding that they would have to change out the pipes more frequently, or you know, if maybe it's the reason that they aren't really thinking about that is because we're talking about like short-term deadlines, like quarterly you know, profit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those are all great questions, and actually we'll cover some of it in the GeoGrid discussion. But in Massachusetts, you must replace leaking pipe. Replacement of pipe is very, very expensive, and you can actually fix it for much less expensive costs. So if you replace all of the pipe in Massachusetts that needs to be replaced, it will cost $20 to $40 billion. So we're talking about something that's cost more than the big dig. It's hugely expensive, and we likely will not be able to use those pipes past 2050 because if we get to our emissions goals, then we won't be using methane. So it's a big, huge cost that we have to decide whether we want to invest in. The gas utilities would say, yes, we want to invest in those, and we want to invest in switching them into hydrogen compatible pipes, because there are hydrogen compatible pipes. You can use plastic pipes instead of steel. But the problem is that it's hugely expensive, and it doesn't really solve all our problems.
And Yeshwant, I think you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, Andy, I have a question. May it be in US or in other countries, are there any subsidies to incentivize the production of green hydrogen? I mean, the reason I ask a question is that there was some sort of announcement by people in the Indian government saying that hydrogen will be the next big thing in the energy space. We'll have hydrogen vehicles and all these things.
Yes, so there are subsidies for hydrogen that were just passed in the United States. It's like $9.5 billion or something. There's going to be hydrogen centers around the US. They're going to be researching both blue and green hydrogen. And there are incentives around the world. I know that Australia has incentives for producing green hydrogen. I am not, you may know about India. I don't know what their incentive structure is for India specifically, but Great Britain and Germany are looking at it as well.
So does it make it more competitive now with those subsidies, because subsidies are known to alter the market dynamics?
Doesn't make it more complicated. The idea is to bring down the price of green hydrogen so that we can produce it at larger scale and it can meet the expanded needs. But what happens is that we right now we can't meet industry's needs, and industry's needs will also continue to increase. So we need to make sure that we have green hydrogen to replace the gray hydrogen that we're using now. before we expand its use into blending with methane.
Okay, thank you.
Did I answer the question?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all for those questions. They're really great. So, Andee, are you good to move on to part 2? It's a little shorter.
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit shorter.
And if you have any other questions, you can type them in the chat as well.
So now that I've explained the future that we don't want, which is hydrogen, I do want to explain the very promising solutions that we do have. It's called the GeoGrid, and it's being researched by an organization in Massachusetts called HEAT. They are the Home Energy Efficiency Team. They were kind enough to lend me their slides for this presentation. And I just want to say that they have been working in Massachusetts, and now they've expanded to New York, and they're looking to work in Pennsylvania as well. And so I'm going to be focusing on Massachusetts again, but this is expanding as we talk today. Next slide. So as we discussed, gas utilities are being asked to reduce their greenhouse gases from the gas system, which is inherently greenhouse gas intensive. And regulatory gas decarbonization dockets have begun popping up in different states across the country. This is the one from Massachusetts. And the problem is that decarbonizing gas is pretty hard to do since it is a fossil fuel, and the alternatives are to add different kinds of methane or to add hydrogen, and none of them really work all that well. Next slide. So while the gas utilities are facing this really existential threat, they still must continue to replace their aging infrastructure for safety reasons. And here are the next 5 years of pipe replacement work sites as reported by the Massachusetts utilities. Over the next 2 decades, the total cost of this new replacement infrastructure in Massachusetts will be greater than the cost of all the infrastructure currently in the ground at its depreciated state. So this is a cost of like $20 to $40 billion more that people will be paying for over the next century. Or the next half century. And this just means that the children that we have now will still be paying for these pipes that we're not using after 2050. Next slide. Gas customers are also moving to electric heat pumps at increasing speeds. And each of these buildings moving off the gas system means fewer gas customers remaining, shouldering the system's fixed costs. So all of that gas replacement is part of their fixed costs. At some point, there will be an inflection point hit where heating with gas just becomes so high that heating with air source heat pumps is that it's going to cost less to heat with air source heat pumps. And from then on, gas customers will basically flee faster, increasing costs further. And in the end, the only ones left on the gas system will be those who cannot afford to switch to electric heat pumps. Next slide. So we need something that will safely deliver decarbonized heat at the same or lower cost than gas is now. That isn't hydrogen. Like I said, hydrogen is much, much more expensive than natural gas. So we know that air source heat pumps are much more efficient than gas, and ground source heat pumps are more efficient than air source heat pumps, and network ground source heat pumps are even more efficient. So they're about 6 to 8 times more efficient than gas. These systems can radically reduce the impact on the electric grid as we move buildings to electricity, as well as the amount of renewable energy we need to build in order to power these heat pumps. That means the electricity will actually cost less as well. Next slide. So this is the GeoGrid. It's hard to see, but basically what you'll see is that, like the gas system, the infrastructure is in the street. So those purple lines, those are service lines going to each building. And there are boreholes attached going down just a few hundred feet. The pipes are filled with plain water, and the heat pumps in each building pull off heating or cooling that buildings need from the water. So all components are also all made in America. And for those of you who don't know how heat pumps work and why they are so much more efficient than a gas boiler, it's because they take heat out of the air or the ground and they move it to one place to another. Because they're not actually creating heat, they're just moving it from one place to another. They can be very, very efficient. Next slide. So an engineering firm, Burrow Happold and Engineering, they were the engineers for the New York City's 80 by 50 plan. They did a feasibility report to look at how much energy the geoblock could provide. And they found that this system with boreholes 500 feet deep, spaced every 20 feet down the street in the gas company's right of way, just like our gas system, could meet nearly 100% of the energy demand in the state, including cooling and heating. Next slide. So sharing energy is really important. The network heat pumps have an advantage because they can share this energy. So imagine the supermarket with its fridges that are humming away through the winter. They're expelling a lot of heat. That heat can be shared and warm the water that can be used by nearby homes. And in the summer, the heat from the homes or buildings can be expelled and moved back down into the ground and stored for winter. Next slide.
Wait, here we go. Sorry.
That's all right. How do we know that this works? So there's a variety of case studies across the country and a number in Europe. And this is a picture of Colorado Mesa University. Their 4 systems are interconnected over time and serve 1 million square feet of buildings. As with the GeoBlock, they can interconnect like Lego blocks. These systems have been interconnected over time. And they have a gas boiler for backup should they need to heat water because there's not enough heat from the ground. And they have never been used in the 12 years of this system. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk about the benefits of the GeoGrid in comparison to both the methane gas system and a hydrogen. So the pipes contain only water. So it's much safer than natural gas. There are no gas leaks and there are no explosions. Next slide. It offers resiliency for homes because it provides cooling. The great thing about heat pumps is that they deliver some of the most efficient cooling that you can buy. And we're going to need this as our future gets warmer and warmer. Next slide. We actually get lower energy bills instead of higher energy bills. So the cost of the fuel is about 50% of your current bill. With the Geo system, there's no gas, so that cost is gone. And you can see that really the costs are in installing the pipes and drilling those boreholes, those upfront costs. And those are amortized over decades, the same way that the gas system is. So in the end, the network heat pumps are actually less expensive than replacing the gas system. Next slide. We cut greenhouse gas emissions immediately. The production of electricity used is the only source of emissions associated with the system. So you need electricity to run the heat pumps. In Massachusetts, our grid fuel mix is getting cleaner every year. So every year, the GeoGrid gets cleaner as comparison to gas, which would stay the same over time. Next slide. This is a much more equitable way to get everyone the heat pumps they need. If the heat pumps are installed by the utilities, the cost of the installation would be spread across all of us over decades, delivering renewable, safer, lower cost energy to us all, not just those with the upfront money to buy an air source heat pump. Next slide. Retraining is easier. All those people who currently work for the gas companies can continue to work for the gas companies, gas utilities, but instead of being gas utilities, they'll be heat utilities. So since the water pipes running up and down the street is the same type of water pipe, it's easy to retrain, and there's it's a lot safer because they don't have to worry about explosions. And this concept is supported by labor. Next slide. It's also healthier, so you don't get indoor air pollution from gas stoves, which are bad for children. You don't get outdoor air pollution from venting all of the air pollution out of the homes from gas boilers. So indoor and outdoor air is healthier. Next slide. There's demonstration projects in Massachusetts and New York, and HEAT has convened a research team with Harvard, MIT, and 2 national labs to collect data to share about the health benefits, the energy saving, and how it can best work in different settings. And next slide. If we're successful, all these potential fossil fuel installations could be seed sites for the geogrid to grow out from. Remember, it can be like Legos. So you can create a connected thermal grid, moving all of us to safer, lower cost, more equitable, renewable energy. And this can solve the problem at a speed and scale we desperately need, wasting the least amount of money and time, replacing the old infrastructure with something that we can use for decades to come. Next slide. And I just want to again say thank you to HEAT for allowing me to use their slides. This is not my wonderful slide presentation.
All right. Okay, well, thank you so much for that, Andee. It was really great. I mean, I've seen all the slides, but it was just really effective to learn about it in person. I know that we're almost at the top of the hour. Does anybody have any last questions before we wrap up for Andee? Okay, well, if you think of something, you can also send me an email. So Andee, do you want to put your email in the chat just so they have it?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to close by saying, first of all, it's great to see some new faces that I didn't see the last meeting or before. This will be recorded as well. So if you missed the first half and you want to watch it, you can rewatch it. And Andee is also working on a report that will be coming out, and it will detail a lot of what she just talked about, as well as some of the health impacts. So it'll be a short report though. So if you want to disseminate it in your different health practices or just school communities, you can. So just to keep an eye out, I'll send it out to all the ambassadors as well. And just keep your eyes peeled for your email for different updates regarding ambassador events and such. And I hope that you all enjoy wonderful Earth Day celebrations, Friday, Saturday, whenever, if you are able to attend, or if you're studying, good luck with your studying.
Thank you all.
Yeah, so we'll give you 2 minutes back so you can move on with your day. Thank you again for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, Andee, I did have one like random question for you. I didn't want to like keep everybody, but I was just wondering if you know, in terms of how like the switching over to electric heating pumps, if they're like how that would look in terms of like hospital infrastructure and that kind of thing. If you know anything about that, I'm just curious.
I actually have been working with MGH on looking at they're building a new hospital. So you would put in these network ground source heat pumps. You might have some air source heat pumps. They're actually like they're industrial sides, so they're called VRFs, and you can put those on the roofs of hospitals. So the thing about hospitals is that they're not always heated in the same way that individual homes are. A lot of them are heated with steam from district energy. So it's complicated to speak to a very specific hospital, but it is possible to move hospitals off of fossil fuels. If they're on district heating, you have to move the district heating off of fossil fuels to networked heat pumps. And if they are if they're heated with gas or oil on site, then you have to switch as well. This gets very complicated, but like there's hospitals usually have cogeneration plants where they use either natural gas or hydrogen. They burn it and then they grab the heat. So they burn it for electricity, but they also use the heat when they do that to heat the hospital. So they're very efficient compared to what we use in our buildings, but they're still fossil based. So I don't know if that answers your question. It gets complicated very quickly.
No, that's super helpful. Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you so much again for the talk.
Yeah, thank you for attending.
Thanks so much, Kayla. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.